The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Windsor Castle as Sarah Mitchell adjusted her new uniform for the third time. At 22, she had dreamed of working with the Queen's horses since childhood, but now that the moment had arrived, her hands trembled slightly as she approached the royal stables. The head groom, Thomas Whitmore, had been working with these magnificent animals for over 30 years. His weathered face showed the wisdom that comes from decades of understanding horse behavior, and his gentle eyes missed nothing. When Sarah introduced herself, Thomas studied her carefully, noting the nervous energy that radiated from her small frame. "The horses can sense everything," Thomas told her as they walked through the pristine stable corridors. "Fear, sadness, joy, anger, they know it all before we even realize it ourselves. These aren't ordinary horses, Sarah. They're royal. Guards trained to remain calm in crowds, unfazed by cannon fire, and steady under the weight of ceremony. But more than that, they have hearts bigger than most people realize." Sarah nodded, trying to absorb every word while stealing glances at the magnificent black horses in their stalls. Each animal stood nearly 17 hands high, their coats gleaming like polished obsidian. Their eyes held an intelligence that seemed almost human, and Sarah felt as though they were studying her just as intently as she was observing them. Among the horses, one stood out immediately. Midnight, a stallion with a small white star on. His forehead watched Sarah with particular interest. His ears were forward, alert but not aggressive, and something in his gaze seemed to communicate understanding. Thomas noticed the interaction and smiled knowingly. "Midnight has always been special," Thomas explained. "He's been with us for 8 years now, and I've never seen him take to someone so quickly. Usually he's more reserved with newcomers." As if responding to his name, Midnight stepped closer to his stall door, extending his massive head toward Sarah. Sarah's initial fear began to melt away as she reached out tentatively to touch Midnight's velvety muzzle. Warm against her palm, and she felt an immediate connection that surprised her. It was as if Midnight understood that she needed reassurance, that this new environment felt overwhelming to someone so young and inexperienced. The other horses in the stable began to show interest as well. Thunder, a mare known for her spirited personality, nickered softly from her stall. Majesty, an older gelding with years of royal ceremonies behind him, turned his wise eyes toward the newcomer with what could only be described as approval. Even Storm, typically the most aloof of the group, lifted his head to acknowledge Sarah's presence. Thomas watched this unusual welcome with growing amazement. In all his years working with these horses, he had rarely seen them respond so positively to someone new. Usually there was a period of adjustment, a careful dance of trust building that could take weeks or even months. But something about Sarah seemed to speak to these animals on a level that transcended normal human-horse relationships. "I think you're going to fit in here just fine," Thomas said, his voice filled with warmth and approval. "These horses don't give their trust easily, but when they do, it means something special. They see something in you that perhaps you don't even see in yourself yet." As Sarah spent her first day learning the routines, the feeding schedules, and the grooming techniques specific to the royal stable, she began to understand that this was more than just a job. This was a calling, a chance to be part of something magnificent and timeless. The horses seemed to sense her growing confidence, responding to her touch with gentle acceptance and patience. By evening, as Sarah prepared to leave for her first day, Midnight approached his stall door once more. This time he lowered his great head toward her, and Sarah instinctively reached up to stroke his neck. The stallion's eyes closed briefly, a sign of complete trust and contentment that made Sarah's heart swelled with emotion. Thomas, observing from nearby, knew that something extraordinary was beginning. He had seen many grooms come and go over the years, but the connection between Sarah and these royal horses was different. It was deeper, more intuitive, and filled with a mutual understanding that spoke to the very essence of what made these animals so special. As Sarah walked home that evening, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just taken a turn toward something wonderful and meaningful. The horses had welcomed her not just as a caretaker, but as a friend, and she sensed that their relationship would grow into something truly remarkable. Little did she know that in the days to come, These magnificent animals would teach her lessons about kindness, compassion, and the deep emotional intelligence that exists in the hearts of all living creatures. 3 weeks into her new position, Sarah had settled into a comfortable routine with the royal horses. Each morning brought the familiar sounds of gentle nickering as the horses greeted her arrival, and she found herself looking forward to these moments of connection more than anything else in her day. It was during her 4th week that Sarah received the phone call that would change everything. She was in the middle of grooming Thunder when her mobile phone buzzed insistently in her pocket. The caller ID showed her mother's number, which was unusual since her mother typically respected her work hours. "Sarah, darling," her mother's voice was strained and shaky. "I need you to come home as soon as possible. It's your father. He's had a heart attack. He's in the hospital, and the doctors aren't sure." Mother's voice broke, unable to finish the sentence. The brush fell from Sarah's trembling hands, clattering against the stone floor of the stable. Thunder immediately sensed the change in Sarah's energy. Turning her head to study the young woman's face with concerned brown eyes, Sarah's legs felt weak, and she reached out to steady herself. Against Thunder's strong neck, "I'll be there as soon as I can," Sarah managed to whisper into the phone before hanging up. The world seemed to tilt around her as the reality of the situation sank in. Her father, who had always been her rock, her biggest supporter in pursuing her dreams, was fighting for his life in a hospital bed 2 hours away. Thomas appeared at the stall door. Having heard the commotion, one look at Sarah's pale face and shaking hands told him everything he needed to know. "Family emergency?" he asked gently, his voice filled with understanding and compassion. Sarah nodded, unable to trust herself to speak without breaking down. "Completely, my father," she managed to whisper. "Heart attack. I need to go to him." "Of course," Thomas said immediately. "Go. Don't worry about anything here. Family comes first. Always." He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, offering the kind of paternal comfort that Sarah desperately needed in that moment. But as Sarah moved to leave the stall, something extraordinary happened. Thunder stepped sideways, gently blocking Sarah's path. The mare's eyes were soft and understanding. She lowered her head to nuzzle Sarah's shoulder in a gesture of pure comfort. It was as if Thunder knew that Sarah needed a moment of connection before facing the difficult journey ahead. Midnight. Hearing the distress in Sarah's voice from his neighboring stall, began to paw at his door. His usual calm demeanor was replaced by an obvious concern for the young woman who had become so important to him. The stallion's eyes never left Sarah's face, and his gentle whickering seemed to offer reassurance and strength. One by one, the other horses in the stable began to respond to the emotional energy that filled the air. Majesty stretched his neck over his stall door, his wise eyes fixed on Sarah with an expression of deep understanding. Storm, usually aloof and independent, approached his stall door and watched quietly. His presence offering silent support, Thomas watched in amazement as every horse in the royal stable seemed to sense Sarah's pain and respond with their own unique form of comfort. He had worked with horses his entire life, but he had never witnessed such a collective display of empathy and emotional intelligence. "They know," Thomas said softly, his voice filled with wonder. "They can feel your pain, Sarah. They want to help you carry it." Sarah felt overwhelmed by the horses' response to her distress. Their gentle eyes, soft touches, and quiet presence provided a comfort that human words could never match. She realized that in just a few short weeks, these magnificent animals had become more than her charges. They had become her friends, her emotional anchors in a world that suddenly felt uncertain and frightening. Midnight managed to reach his head far enough over his stall door to touch Sarah's arm with his muzzle. The contact was gentle but deliberate, and Sarah felt a wave of strength flow through her. It was as if the stallion was sharing his own courage with her, offering her the same steadiness that had carried him through countless royal ceremonies and public appearances. "I have to go," Sarah said, her voice stronger now, thanks to the horse's support. "But I'll be back. I promise I'll be back." As she gathered her personal belongings and prepared to leave for the hospital, each horse seemed to offer their own farewell. Thunder whinnied softly. Majesty nodded his great head as if giving his blessing, and Storm stepped forward in his stall to watch her go. But it was Midnight's response that touched Sarah's heart most deeply. The stallion stood perfectly still. His dark eyes locked on Sarah's face, and in that gaze she saw understanding, support, and an unspoken promise that he would be waiting. For her return, it was a look that conveyed more emotion and comfort than any human words could have provided. As Sarah drove toward the hospital, her hands gripping the steering wheel with determination rather than despair, she carried with her the memory of those gentle eyes and caring hearts. The horses had given her something precious, the strength to face whatever lay ahead, and the knowledge that she was not alone in her struggle. The royal horses had shown her that kindness knows no boundaries, that empathy exists in forms beyond human understanding, and that sometimes the most profound comfort comes from the silent presence of those who simply care. This lesson would sustain her through the difficult days ahead and forever change her understanding of the deep emotional bonds that can exist between humans and animals. The hospital corridors felt cold and sterile as Sarah rushed toward the cardiac intensive care unit. Her father lay connected to multiple machines, his usually strong and vibrant presence reduced to a fragile figure surrounded by beeping monitors. And for tubes? The sight broke Sarah's heart, but she drew strength from the memory of Midnight's steady gaze and the collective support of all the royal horses. For 3 days, Sarah remained by her father's bedside, holding his hand and whispering words of encouragement during his brief moments of consciousness. Her mother, exhausted from worry and lack of sleep, finally convinced Sarah to return to work, promising to call immediately if there were any changes in her father's condition. When Sarah arrived at the royal stables on Thursday morning, she was physically and emotionally drained. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her usual bright energy had been replaced by a quiet sadness that seemed to weigh down her entire being. She had barely slept, barely eaten, and the stress of watching her father fight for his life had taken its toll on every aspect of her well-being. Thomas took one look at her, immediately offered to handle her duties for the day, but Sarah shook her head. "I need to be here," she said softly. "I need to be with them. They give me strength." As Sarah approached Midnight's stall, the stallion immediately sensed the change in her emotional state. Where before there had been nervous energy and excitement, now there was deep sadness and exhaustion. Midnight's reaction was immediate and profound. He stepped forward to the stall door and gently pressed his forehead against Sarah's chest, a gesture of such tenderness that it brought tears to her eyes. In the neighboring stall, began to pace restlessly. The mare's usual spirited demeanor was replaced by obvious concern for Sarah's well-being. She whinnied softly, a sound that seemed to express sympathy and understanding. It was as if thunder was trying to communicate that she shared Sarah's worry and wanted to help ease her burden. But it was what happened next that left Thomas speechless and brought tears to Sarah's eyes. Majesty, the oldest and wisest of the royal horses, began to perform a behavior that Thomas had never witnessed in his 30 years of working with these animals. The gelding started to bow his head repeatedly, lowering it almost to the ground, in what could only be interpreted as a gesture of respect and comfort. "I've never seen anything like this," Thomas whispered, his voice filled with awe. "It's as if he's showing reverence for your pain, acknowledging your struggle." Storm, typically the most independent of the horses, approached his stall door and stood quietly, his presence offering silent solidarity. Even the younger horses in the stable seemed to understand that something was different. Their beloved caretaker was carrying a burden that required their collective support. Sarah spent extra time with each horse that day, finding that their gentle presence provided a peace that nothing else could offer. When she groomed Midnight, the stallion stood perfectly still, as if understanding that these quiet moments together were healing for both of them. His breathing was deep and calm, and Sarah found herself matching his rhythm, feeling her own anxiety begin to settle. During lunch break, Sarah received a call from her mother with encouraging news. Her father had shown slight improvement overnight, responding better to treatment and showing signs of increased alertness. The relief that flooded through Sarah was immediate and overwhelming. She found herself crying tears of gratitude right there in the stable corridor. The horses sensed the shift in Sarah's emotional state immediately. Midnight whinnied with what sounded distinctly like celebration, and Thunder began to prance in her stall with renewed energy. It was as if the entire stable had been holding its breath, waiting for news of Sarah's father. And now they could all breathe easier, knowing that healing was beginning. Majesty's wise eyes seemed to sparkle with something that looked remarkably like relief, and Storm actually approached his stall door voluntarily for the first time since Sarah's return. The collective response of the horses to Sarah's improved mood was so pronounced that several other stable workers stopped to observe the unusual behavior. "They're celebrating with you," Thomas observed, shaking his head in wonder. "I've worked with horses my entire life, but I've never seen emotional intelligence quite like this. They've been worried about you, Sarah, genuinely worried." As the day progressed, Sarah noticed that each horse seemed to make an extra effort to connect with her. They nuzzled her hands more frequently, stood closer to the stall doors when she passed, and responded to her voice with increased attention and affection. It was as if they understood that she had been through something difficult and wanted to surround her with their love and support. When the evening came and it was time for Sarah to leave, the horses gathered at their stall doors to watch her go. This had become their daily ritual, but today it felt different, more intentional and meaningful. Midnight stretched his neck as far as possible to touch Sarah's hand one final time, and the gesture felt like a blessing, a promise that tomorrow would bring continued healing and hope. As Sarah drove home that evening, she reflected on the extraordinary day she had experienced. The horses had not only sensed her pain and offered comfort, but they had also somehow known when her burden had lightened and had celebrated with her. Their emotional connection to her well-being went far beyond anything she had imagined possible. She realized that these magnificent animals had taught her something profound about the nature of compassion and empathy. They had shown her that caring for others during their darkest moments is one of the most important things any living being can do, and that sometimes the most powerful healing comes not from words, but from simply being present with an open heart. The royal horses had become her teachers, showing her that true kindness requires no words, no grand gestures, only the willingness to share in another's experience and offer whatever comfort is possible. This lesson would stay with Sarah forever, shaping not only her relationship with the horses, but her understanding of what it means to truly care for another living being. 2 weeks after her father's heart attack, Sarah's life had settled into a new routine that balanced her work at the royal stables with regular visits to help her father through his recovery. Her father was improving steadily, but the experience had changed Sarah in ways she was only beginning to understand. She found herself more attuned to the emotions and needs of others, both human and animal. It was during this period of personal growth that Sarah encountered Emma, a 70-year-old girl who would forever change her understanding of the horse's capacity for kindness. Emma had been brought to the stables as part of a special program that allowed children with serious illnesses to visit the royal horses. She was small for her age, with pale skin and tired eyes that spoke of too many hospital stays and medical treatments. Emma suffered from a rare condition that required frequent chemotherapy treatments, leaving her weak and often frightened. Her parents had requested the visit, hoping that meeting the famous royal horses might bring some joy to their daughter's difficult journey. When they arrived at the stables, Emma clung to her mother's hand, clearly overwhelmed by the new environment and the impressive size of the horses. Thomas had assigned Sarah to guide the family through their visit, knowing that her gentle nature and deep connection with the horses would make the experience special for young Emma. As they approached the first stall, Sarah noticed that the horses were behaving differently than usual. Their movements were slower, more deliberate, and their usual spirited energy had been replaced by a calm gentleness that seemed almost deliberate. Midnight was the first horse Emma encountered, and his response to the child was immediate and profound. The stallion, who stood nearly 17 hands high and weighed over 1,000 pounds, seemed to understand instinctively that he was in the presence of someone fragile and vulnerable. He lowered his massive head to Emma's level and stood perfectly still, his breathing slow and steady. Emma's eyes widened with wonder rather than fear. Something about Midnight's gentle demeanor spoke to her in a way that bypassed her usual anxiety. Around new situations? "He's beautiful," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the quiet stable. Sarah watched in amazement as Midnight continued to maintain his gentle posture, allowing Emma to approach at her own pace. When the little girl finally reached out to touch his muzzle, the stallion closed his eyes briefly, as if savoring the contact. It was a gesture of such tenderness that Emma's mother began to cry, overwhelmed by the horse's obvious understanding of her daughter's fragility. Thunder, in the neighboring stall, seemed to sense what was happening and joined in the extraordinary display of gentleness. The mare, known for her spirited personality, became as calm and steady as a therapy horse, lowering her head and offering soft, encouraging nickering sounds that seemed designed to comfort the young visitor. But it was Majesty's response that truly took everyone's breath away. It was the old gelding, with his years of experience and deep wisdom, approached his stall door and did something that left the entire group speechless. He began to perform a series of gentle bows, lowering his head in what could only be interpreted as a gesture of honor and respect for the brave little girl who was fighting such a difficult battle. Emma giggled with delight at Majesty's performance, clapping her small hands together with more energy than she had shown in weeks. The sound of her laughter seemed to energize all the horses, and they began to respond with their own gentle celebrations, whinnying softly and moving gracefully. In their stalls, "They know," Emma's father said quietly, his voice filled with emotion. "They know she's sick, and they're being extra gentle with her." Sarah nodded, unable to speak as she watched the incredible interaction unfold. She had seen the horses respond to her own emotional needs, but witnessing their instinctive understanding of a child's vulnerability was something entirely different. These magnificent animals were demonstrating a level of emotional intelligence and compassion that surpassed anything she had ever imagined. Storm, usually the most aloof of the group, surprised everyone by approaching his stall door and offering a gentle whinny that sounded almost like a song. The gelding's eyes were soft and kind as he watched Emma's delighted reaction. And for the first time since Sarah had known him, Storm seemed to be actively seeking connection with a human. Emma spent over an hour with the horses, moving from stall to stall with growing confidence and joy. Each horse seemed to understand their role in bringing happiness to this special little visitor. They stood quietly when she wanted to pet them, performed gentle movements when she laughed, offered soft nickers of encouragement when she seemed tired. As the visit neared its end, Emma's energy began to flag, but her spirits remained high. She had connected with each horse in a unique way, but it was clear that Midnight had captured her heart completely. When it came time to say goodbye, Emma approached the stallion's stall one final time. "Thank you for being so nice to me," she whispered to Midnight, her small hand resting on his muzzle. "I was scared when I came here, but you made me feel brave." Midnight's response was extraordinary. The stallion gently lowered his head until it was resting against Emma's chest, and he remained perfectly still for several moments, as if offering her a final gift of comfort and strength. The gesture was so profound, so filled with understanding and compassion, that there wasn't a dry eye among the adults watching. Emma's parents were amazed by their daughter's transformation during the visit. The tired, anxious child who had arrived at the stables had been replaced by a bright-eyed little girl filled with excitement and joy. The horses had given her something that no medical treatment could provide, a sense of wonder, connection, and the knowledge that she was worthy of such gentle care and attention. As the family prepared to leave, Emma made a request that surprised. "Everyone, can I come back and visit them again?" she asked, her voice filled with hope. "I want to tell them about my next doctor visit and how brave I'm going to be." Sarah's heart swelled with emotion as she assured Emma that she would always be welcome at the stables. She realized that the horses had not only given Emma a wonderful experience, but they had also taught her something valuable about courage and the healing power of connection. The royal horses had once again shown that their capacity for kindness extended far beyond what anyone might expect, and that their ability to sense and respond to human need was truly extraordinary. Emma's visits to the royal stables became a regular occurrence over the following months, and each time she arrived, the horses seemed to anticipate her presence with obvious excitement. Sarah began to document these visits. It's not only for Emma's family, but because she was witnessing something truly remarkable that deserved to be remembered and shared. During Emma's fourth visit, something extraordinary happened that would become legendary among the stable staff. Emma had been feeling particularly weak that day due to a recent round of treatments, and she arrived at the stables in a wheelchair, too tired to walk the usual routes through the barn. Her parents were concerned that the visit might be too much for her. But Emma had insisted on coming to see her beloved horses. When Sarah wheeled Emma into the stable corridor, the horses' reaction was immediate and unprecedented. One by one, each horse moved to the front of their stall and lowered their heads in what could only be described as a collective bow. It was as if they had somehow communicated with each other and decided to offer Emma a royal salute that acknowledged both her courage and her struggle. Midnight led this extraordinary display, his magnificent head lowered in a gesture of such respect that Emma's father had to steady himself against the wall. Thunder followed, then Majesty, then Storm, and finally every other horse in the stable joined in this incredible demonstration of honor and compassion. The sight of these powerful, majestic animals all bowing in unison left everyone present speechless. Emma's reaction was pure magic. Despite her weakness and fatigue, she began to giggle with delight, her face lighting up with a joy that transformed her entire appearance. "They're welcoming me," she exclaimed, clapping her hands together with what little energy she had. They remember me, and they're happy I'm here." Sarah wiped tears from her eyes as she watched this incredible scene unfold. In all her time working with horses, she had never witnessed such a coordinated display of emotional intelligence and compassion. It was as if the horses had developed their own protocol for greeting Emma, recognizing her special status as someone who needed extra care and attention. Thomas, who had been working late that evening, emerged from the feed room to witness this unprecedented scene. He stood transfixed, watching as the horses maintained their respectful postures while Emma wheeled slowly past each stall. "In 30 years," he said quietly to Sarah, "I have never seen anything like this. They've created their own ceremony for her." But the horses' kindness didn't end with their collective bow. As Emma visited each stall, every horse seemed to understand that she was more fragile than usual and adjusted their behavior accordingly. Midnight barely moved when Emma reached out to touch his face, standing as still as a statue to ensure that there was no chance of accidentally bumping or startling her. His breathing was so slow and controlled that Emma could rest her small hand on his neck and feel completely secure. Thunder, usually spirited and energetic, became remarkably gentle, offering soft nickers that sounded almost like lullabies. The mare seemed to understand that Emma needed soothing sounds rather than excitement, and she provided exactly the kind of calm presence that would comfort a child who was fighting such a difficult battle. Majesty, with his years of wisdom and experience, positioned himself at the perfect angle to allow Emma easy access from her wheelchair. The old gelding's eyes were filled with such kindness and understanding that Emma's mother found herself crying again. Overwhelmed by the depth of compassion these animals were showing her daughter, even Storm, typically the most independent and aloof of the horses, made an extraordinary effort to connect with Emma during this visit. He approached his stall door and offered a gentle whinny that seemed to say, "I see you, I understand you're not feeling well, and I want you to know you're welcome here." As the visit progressed, Sarah noticed that the horses were not just being gentle with Emma, they were actively working to lift her spirits. When Emma seemed particularly tired, Midnight would do something playful like tossing his head or pawing gently at his stall door. When she laughed, Thunder would respond with enthusiastic but controlled movement that showed her joy without overwhelming her. The most touching moment came when Emma asked if she could give each horse a special treat. Sarah had prepared some apple slices, and as Emma offered them to each horse, their responses were incredibly tender. They took the treats with the utmost gentleness, their lips barely touching Emma's small palm, ensuring that she felt safe and secure throughout the interaction. Midnight's response to his treat was particularly moving. After accepting the apple slice, he gently nudged Emma's hand with his muzzle, and then rested his head near her wheelchair, as if offering himself as a source of comfort and strength. Emma instinctively reached up to stroke his neck, and the connection between them was so profound that everyone watching felt they were witnessing something sacred. "They love her," Emma's mother whispered to Sarah. "These incredible animals actually love my daughter." Sarah nodded, her throat too tight with emotion to speak. She had come to understand that the horse's response to Emma went beyond mere gentleness or training. These animals had formed a genuine emotional bond with this brave little girl. They were using their own unique ways to show her that she was valued, cherished, and supported in her difficult journey. As the visit came to an end, Emma made an announcement that surprised everyone. "I want to write them a letter," she said, her voice stronger than it had been all day. "I want to tell them how much they mean to me and how they help me be brave when I have to go to the hospital." The idea of Emma writing letters to the horses touched everyone's hearts. Sarah promised to help her deliver the letters and even read them aloud to each horse. It was a beautiful way to formalize the special relationship that had developed between this remarkable child and these extraordinary animals. As Emma's family prepared to leave that evening, each horse offered their own farewell. The collective goodbye was as coordinated and touching as their welcome had been. With each animal taking a moment to acknowledge Emma's departure, Midnight's farewell was particularly poignant. He watched Emma's wheelchair until she was completely out of sight, his eyes never leaving her small figure. This visit had shown everyone present that the horse's capacity for kindness was not just instinctive, but deeply intentional. They had recognized Emma's special needs and had created their own ways of showing her love, respect, and support. Their compassion had transformed a difficult day for a sick child into a magical experience, filled with joy, wonder, and the knowledge that she was surrounded by friends who truly cared about her well-being. 6 months after Emma's first visit to the royal stables, Sarah received news that would test the depth of the horse's emotional intelligence in ways no one could have anticipated. Emma's condition had taken a serious turn for the worse, and her doctors had exhausted most treatment options. Her parents called to ask if it would be possible for Emma to visit the horses one final time, as their daughter had expressed that seeing her friends at the stable was her most important wish. When Sarah shared this news with Thomas, both of them struggled to contain their emotions. They had watched Emma grow stronger and more confident through her visits with the horses. The thought of losing this brave little girl was almost unbearable. But they both knew that making Emma's final wish come true was the most important thing they could do, as they prepared for Emma's last visit. Sarah noticed that the horses seemed different, more subdued than usual. It was as if they sensed that something significant was about to happen. Midnight stood quietly in his stall, his usual energy replaced by a solemn stillness that was completely out of character. Thunder moved restlessly, as if she was anxious about something she couldn't quite understand. When Emma arrived with her parents, the change in her condition was immediately apparent. She was much weaker than during her previous visits, requiring oxygen support and spending most of her time resting against her mother's shoulder. But her eyes still lit up when she saw the stable, and she managed a small smile when she heard the familiar sounds of the horses. The horses' reaction to Emma's arrival was unlike anything Sarah had ever witnessed. As her wheelchair approached the stable corridor, every horse moved to the front of their stalls. But instead of their usual enthusiastic greetings, they stood in complete silence. It was a respectful, reverent quiet that seemed to acknowledge the gravity of the moment. Midnight was the first to approach his stall door, and his response to seeing Emma took everyone's breath away. The magnificent stallion lowered his head and gently touched his muzzle to Emma's forehead in what could only be described as a blessing. His touch was so gentle, so filled with understanding and love, that Emma's parents began to cry quietly.
"Hello."
"Midnight," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible but filled with joy. "I missed you so much. I have something important to tell you." As if understanding that this visit was different from all the others, Midnight remained perfectly still, his attention completely focused on Emma. His eyes were soft and kind, and he seemed to be listening with every fiber of his being as Emma began to speak. "The doctors say I might have to go on a very long journey soon," Emma said, her small hand resting on Midnight's muzzle. "But I want you to know that meeting you and all your friends has been the best part of being sick. You made me feel brave and special, and I'll never forget how kind you've been to me." Thunder, listening from the neighboring stall, began to make soft sounds that seemed like gentle songs of comfort. The mare's usual spirited energy had been replaced by a tender presence that offered support without overwhelming Emma's fragile state one by one. Emma visited each horse, sharing personal messages and memories from their time together. Majesty received a special thank you for his wisdom and gentle bows. Storm was praised for overcoming his shyness to become her friend. Each horse listened with an attention and understanding that went far beyond normal animal behavior. But it was during Emma's final moments with Midnight that something truly extraordinary occurred. As Emma prepared to say goodbye, she asked her father to help her stand up from her wheelchair one last time. With tremendous effort and assistance, she managed to stand and wrap her small arms around Midnight's neck in a gentle hug. Midnight's response was profound and moving. The stallion, who weighed over 1,000 pounds and possessed incredible strength, became as still and gentle as a lamb. He seemed to understand the precious nature of this moment and the fragility of the small girl who was holding him. He lowered his head to rest against Emma's shoulder, and for several minutes they stood together in perfect harmony. During this embrace, something magical happened that none of the adults present would ever forget. The other horses in the stable began to join in what could only be described as a farewell chorus. Thunder offered gentle whinnies that sounded like a lullaby. Majesty contributed deep, resonant sounds that seemed to carry the weight of years of wisdom. Even Storm added his voice to this incredible symphony of love and support. The sound was hauntingly beautiful, a collective expression of emotion that seemed to encompass love, gratitude, and a promise that Emma would always hold a special place in their hearts. It was as if the horses were telling her that her journey, wherever it might lead, would be filled with the strength and courage they had seen her display during their time together. Emma listened to their chorus with tears of joy streaming down her face. "They're singing for me," she whispered in wonder. "They're telling me it's okay, aren't they?" Sarah could barely speak through her own tears, but she managed to nod and whisper, "Yes, sweetheart. They're telling you how much they love you and how proud they are of your courage." As the horses' chorus gradually faded into gentle silence, Emma slowly released her embrace with Midnight. The stallion lifted his head and looked directly into her eyes with an expression of such profound understanding and love that everyone present felt they were witnessing something sacred and eternal. "I love you all so much," Emma said, her voice growing stronger despite her physical weakness. "Thank you for teaching me that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you keep going even when you are scared, and you always remember that you're not alone." The wisdom in those words, spoken by such a young child, left the adults speechless. Emma had learned something from these horses that many people never discover in their entire lives: that true courage comes from connection, love, and the knowledge that others care about your journey. As Emma's family prepared to leave the stables for the final time, each horse offered their own personal goodbye. But it was Midnight's farewell that created the most lasting memory. As Emma's wheelchair moved past his stall, the stallion performed one final bow, deeper and more respectful than any he had ever offered before. It was a gesture of such honor and reverence that it seemed to acknowledge not just Emma's departure, but the incredible impact she had made on all their lives. Emma passed away peacefully 3 weeks later, surrounded by her family and holding a photo of herself with Midnight. Her parents later shared that in her final days, she spoke constantly about the horses and how they had taught her that love comes in many forms, and that kindness can be found in the most unexpected places. The horses seemed to sense Emma's passing, even before her parents called to share the news. For several days, they were unusually quiet and subdued, as if they were mourning the loss of their special friend. Midnight stood at his stall door for hours, looking toward the stable entrance as if waiting for a wheelchair that would never come again. Sarah and Thomas decided to create a small memorial garden near the stables in Emma's honor. They planted flowers that would bloom throughout the year, ensuring that there would always be beauty and life in the space where Emma had found so much joy and courage. A small plaque was installed that read, "In memory of Emma, who taught us that the greatest strength comes from the gentlest hearts. The horses' response to the memorial garden was immediate and touching. They would often gather at the fence nearest to the garden, standing quietly as if paying their respects to their departed friend. Midnight, in particular, seemed drawn to the space. Often standing vigil near the flowers that honored Emma's memory, Emma's story spread throughout the royal household and beyond, touching the hearts of everyone who heard about the incredible bond between a brave little girl and the horses who loved her. Her parents established a foundation that brought other sick children to visit therapy horses. Inspired by the healing power they had witnessed in their daughter's relationship with the royal horses years later, Sarah would look back on Emma's visits as the most important lesson she ever learned about the true nature of kindness and compassion. The horses had shown her that love transcends species, that empathy requires no words, and that sometimes the most profound healing comes from simply being present with an open heart. Midnight continued to greet visitors with the same gentle wisdom that had made Emma feel so special, and every time he lowered his head in that characteristic bow, Sarah was reminded of the extraordinary capacity for love that exists within these magnificent animals. The horses had not just shown kindness to Emma, they had demonstrated that. True compassion means recognizing the preciousness of every life and offering whatever comfort is possible during the journey. Emma's legacy lived on. In every interaction between the horses and their visitors, a reminder that even in the face of life's greatest challenges, there is always room for love, hope, and the kind of gentle kindness that can transform hearts and heal souls. The royal horses had taught everyone who knew Emma's story that the most powerful force in the world is not strength or speed, but the willingness to open one's heart to another's pain and offer whatever comfort is possible. In the end, Emma and the horses had taught each other and everyone who witnessed